Good afternoon. I'd like to call our work session to order. As you know, our purpose for this work session is to really move towards drilling down on the school board's proposed budget. At this point, we will have additional opportunity for citizens' comment tonight at the business meeting. But we have on the agenda for the business meeting to be able to vote on the school board's proposed budget, largely depending upon how we do this afternoon. I'd like to welcome Ms. Weitzel from City Manager's Office here, who has been a partner with us as we've worked on the budget and looked at our potential around the funding formula. So in any event, I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor. Just as a recap, we received the superintendent's proposed budget to the school board. I believe that was back March 7th, somewhere around that time frame. And at that time, we received presentation by Ms. Ingram. I think we spent about 2 to 3 hours in a work session and discussion there. Following that, we had another meeting last week. We had the opportunity to have some conversations with each board member, have an opportunity to share thoughts back with the superintendent. Of course, we also heard from about 26 to 30 speakers last week. We've received somewhat of an update from Dr. Boone in terms of some of the questions that we've raised, but we have the opportunity to further discuss that today. And so really at this point, what I want to try to do is to give each board member an opportunity to discuss any additional modifications or recommendations that board members may have regarding the proposed budget. Just as a reminder, in many ways, this is I don't want to say it's the easy part, but it's the ask part. We're just trying to put together an appropriate budget that we can send over to the city for consideration. And then at some point, the city will have public hearings on its overall budget. And then we'll receive, at least as of right now, looks like in May, recommendations back from the city in terms of what their approved budget will be and how they will respond to our requests. If we're fortunate and they respond back with more than we asked for, then we'll have to figure out what we want to do with that. If they respond with what we asked for, then we still will come back and ratify what we are proposing. And if we end up with something less, then we know we'll have to come back and hear from Dr. Boone and administration how to make some recommendations for us in terms of the final budget. So I've talked enough. We have a couple hours set aside for right now. We can extend a little if we need to, but I just wanted to open up the floor. I think last time we went by seniority, but we don't have to do that this time. So is there anything that anyone would like to ask questions about or make recommendations at this time? Okay. Ms. Wagner?
Yeah, I still have a concern, and I don't know if we can add it to the budget or if we should, and I think I brought it up a couple of times, a concern in terms of security, especially for our elementary grades. And I know we have the SROs in the middle school and high schools, and it seems like every time I turn on the news, somebody has shot somebody or whatever, and I mean, we were fortunate enough in Maryland that somebody was, not that I approve of all of that, but, I still have that concern.
Dr. Boone, anything you like to, even though we're in the budget time, we know this is something that you all look at really every day, whether you want to or not. But you just like to at least give some feedback in terms of how we're currently handling security to the extent that you can publicly, and just thoughts as far as the budget is concerned.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. As we always do, we debrief following all of our meetings, and so we certainly had a debrief as it related to many of the items that were discussed last week. The school safety and security is how we begin and end each day. And one of the considerations that we make, again, and some places that we had things set that other school districts around us did not, was the buzz-in entry. And I certainly acknowledge the comments that not all the times the schools ask the appropriate questions and direct folks to the appropriate place. So that's not a fiscal impact. That's making sure we have the right training in place, and we reinforce the use of our of staff using their badges. You know, one of the things we require is that staff sign in, even from the trades and others, that they go through the office to sign in, so that we aren't propping doors and letting that type of work occur. We do have support, some security support at a few of our elementary schools. Those have been driven primarily around the size of the school. For example, Crossroads shares with Lindenwood. Lindenwood's issues were not internal school issues. They were more about some vandalism that was repeatedly occurring to vehicles parked at the school. Occasionally some weekend break-ins, but that's how we've deployed that. We did add a security officer at Southside STEM Academy this year. With all of our security officers, they are also designed to support a school if needed. So if there's something that emerges in the work that we do very closely with the Norfolk Police Department, or anything that we hear, then we will dispatch security in a proactive manner to be on site for something. Same thing with the school resource officers. We work with the various supervisors within the sectors of the city, and they too will give us the shared support that we need. You know, the balance in unarmed security officers and gun threats is something that we have to continue to weigh. Our security officers are unarmed. They are trained, however, they are unarmed. And so that's something for us to consider. One of my biggest concerns in school safety is, yes, making sure we have safe schools by the practices and things that we have in place, the supports that we have in place. For example, our team just went through threat assessment training on Monday with the police department. We're one of the only districts, we had requested this pre-anything happening in Florida, or day before yesterday's Maryland shooting and everything else. We had done this request in advance of that. And so we continue to look at what our responses will be. But I do become concerned of turning schools into armed encampments. And what's that right balance between safety and security, and then that being so heavy-handed that becomes a concern and creates fear also. But we do have a system in place where we support all of our schools, and there are about 3 elementary schools that have security support.
Let me ask a question. This is a sad question that I even have to ask. Do we do any kind of drills with the kids in terms of if there is a gunman that comes through?
Yes, we're required to do all types of drills, and we're compliant with that.
Come back if need be. Ms. Basine?
So I have a couple of questions and clarifications. So based on the update that we received, so school counselors will be in every elementary school, correct?
Let me clarify. School counselors are currently in every elementary school.
Right.
Last year, as we were doing some of the right-sizing, my term, as it relates to the number of positions we had in excess of the standards of quality, we did reduce some guidance positions district-wide. And so we've done a couple of things with that. We have gone back and looked at how we were deploying the guidance counselors that we do have across the district. And we see some places where we can make improvements, particularly at the elementary level, that even if it's a school that has a full-time guidance and part of another guidance, how we use the time of the second person effectively so that they are not bouncing from place to place. So those are some of the things that we have there. We have on staff 86 and a half guidance counselors is what we currently fund, and staff. So last year's reduction was 8. The 8th of one of those 8 dealt with Willoughby since it was becoming a pre-K only center. So we eliminated that in terms of a K-12 school, and then there were 7 other reductions. And so we continue to look at what those numbers look like, but as we went back and did some review and some analysis after last week's work session, we feel that we can improve what's happening at the elementary schools. There are only a handful of elementary schools, or fewer, that don't have one full-time. So that's what we're attempting to adjust, so those handful of schools that don't have a full-time at all.
So you would make them whole.
We make them whole. And then we will work to improve how we've assigned the additional support, and so that there's some continuity and what that looks like. For example, and we heard that last week, and a school may have, a school that may not have a full-time may have 4 days covered, but it may be covered by 2 different people. And there are places where we can make those adjustments and improvements so that perhaps those 4 days are covered by the same person, that type of thing.
Right, okay. All right, well, that's good to hear.
See, hold on before you leave that topic. Does anyone else want to have a question on the counselor piece?
I do.
Okay.
So there was a lot that was brought up about having a guidance counselor, a dedicated one in every building. And then there was also the piece about if there were more than 500 students in the elementary school, I believe it was elementary school, that there could be an additional person there. And when I went through and looked at our numbers, we have 6 schools that would kind of fit into that category. My first question is, what is significant about the 500 number through your assessment, Dr. Boone, with guidance and the workload that they have? And then number 2, with what we currently have, do you feel that even with our elementary schools that are over 600, we can still serve them through the various programs and partnerships that we have already in place?
So let me start with your second question.
Okay.
We don't supplant the needs of schools and the requirements to have guidance counselors with partnerships. So
Okay.
those are in addition to. For example, the work that we're doing with the UP Center and the trauma-informed care training, that's in addition to the schools having the guidance counselors. The other piece of it is that you will recall with some of our Department of Defense work, we have extra counselors in a couple of our schools who are designed there to really support the needs of those students who are, military connected. So we have a number of those pieces along with other resources that we tend to engage over time. To the first question, we have, the numbers that we have used are based on the standards of quality requirements. You know, that's our floor. And that's when I was saying earlier, when we did the assessment of our guidance counselors last year, we were looking at, remember we looked at guidance, we looked at art, music, PE. And we were looking at those areas where we had staffed above the standards of quality, and I don't think there's anybody in this state that will declare, well, maybe some, but most wouldn't declare that the standards of quality are sufficient with the goals that a community has for its educational system. And so what we did, we looked to see where we had always balanced the budget based on declining enrollment at the classroom level. We had not, for many years, gone back to address the staffing of those resource positions similarly. So that's what I brought to the board last year, and we made those reductions as part of that work. And so when we look at what the standards of quality require, for example, it's one at the elementary level, I believe it's one full-time guidance counselor per 400 students, and then 1 hour additional per day per 80 students. So that's what the standards say. So we do have a few schools that fall below 400 enrollment. Some of our adjustments last year is where we saw schools having .8, meaning they had 4 days of guidance coverage, and the 5th day, they didn't. So that's part of that realignment that we're going to try to do within our existing. Same thing at the middle school is one full-time guidance counselor per 400, and again, 1 hour per day per 80 students. The high school guideline for SOQ is one full-time per 500 students and 1 additional hour per day per 100 students above that. So those are the standards. That's where those numbers come from. Do they meet the Guidance Counselor Association desires? No, they do not. As well as, and nationally, what are some best practices? They also, we see the same thing in special education, you know, for years, even back to when I was a speech therapist. The goal was to move away from a caseload of 65. I think the best the state has gotten to is 60 for a speech therapist, and in the private sector, 40 might be the maximum caseload that a private sector therapist has. So we have to figure out how do we address some of these needs. And to our conversation last week about social emotional needs, this is where the state really needs to step up its game in terms of how they can support that. You all have seen the report from the legislative session and the fact that those bills that had social emotional positions did not survive the General Assembly, and therefore there is no funding for those as we've seen today. So that's where those numbers come from. Now, we also apply another lens to what's the school's particular needs. So our equity policy demands, and rightfully so, that we look at what a school's individual needs are. And so how does a school end up with fewer than 400 students have one and a part of another? They may have the equivalent of one full-time position and an extra day. The numbers don't warrant that, but the needs of the school and the students do. And so that's how we try to balance this. The other thing, as you remember last year, we tried to remove some of the non-guidance functions and responsibilities from guidance counselors, freeing them up from some of the testing and the other things so that they could focus more of their time on guidance counseling. You'll recall from the alternative ed report that even in the limited study and the limited access of limited focus groups and conversations that they had, that was one of the things that they presented to us, is the fact that our guidance counselors were doing so much more beyond counseling. And so that's how we got to where we are. But so our goal is to, again, restore to that full-time at every school, and then do the cleanup as it relates to the various, that per 80 students, that extra hour, that extra day. We don't go as low as the extra hour, but we do calculate that overall when you see, you know, what's the core number. So you have a school that has an enrollment roughly 2,000 students. That's 4 guidance counselors, 4 guidance counselors at 500. So that's the minimum. And I know as we've talked as a governance team, minimum doesn't always meet our needs. And so we do have numbers above the minimum at the secondary schools also, but we're gonna massage those positions to see if we can't get them aligned. So, but no school has been without counseling. The smallest amount of, the 4 days seem to be the least amount of time that any school had if they didn't have a full-time. So it wasn't like just having 2 days. It was at 4 days.
So with the realignment of the guidance counselors, and then you're talking about substitute nurses and legal and grant and so on, is it still within the framework of the current figure, bottom line, of your proposed operating budget?
Yes, so this is, we went back and looked at our alignment, our assignment. We're trying to do that within the numbers. Within the current proposal.
Recommended. Okay.
The substitute nurse piece was already included in the budget, and so that's why we provided the page number for that, so you can see that was already included. That wasn't anything that we needed to add, it just hadn't been highlighted at that level, but we had already included that in the current budget document.
I know Tanya was still
Yeah, I was
talking
gonna go
about
backwards.
guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, just one thing, I went back and looked at the report that came out from the Commonwealth Institute last year, Demonstrated Harm, and you may recall that Norfolk Public Schools participated in some focus groups, and I know Mrs. Doyle remembers a couple years ago when this coalition of school boards and mayors and Chamber of Commerce and the Urban Crescent had written a letter to the General Assembly related to cuts, and one of the areas that I'll just highlight from that, it said, all told, Virginia Public Schools have about 2,800 fewer staff than in 2009, including teachers, counselors, principals, and support positions. Kept pace with enrollment, there would be 10,400 more staff instructing students and making sure schools run smoothly. So still where the state made cutbacks during the Great Recession to public education, and the localities have felt that burden and stress, we're still trying to recover from that. So we know we have needs, but this balance between what we need the state to do and what we are trying to absorb locally is still in place. So, Ms. Basine, you want to, anything else you have?
Yeah, and last week during our discussion, I had one of my budget recommendations, which I'm not sure that we got consensus among the board, was to add a health and wellness coordinator to the budget. And so I'm opening that back up to discuss.
Add a what? I didn't hear what you said.
A health and wellness coordinator.
Oh, health and wellness.
Which had previously, the division had at one point had one, and then with the recession had been cut, and we haven't been at a point where we could add that back in, and I'm asking now for us to consider adding that in.
So, come back to you, Dr. Boone. What can you explain to the board if we had a health and wellness coordinator, what the role would be if you had one, or if we had one?
The role is actually defined by the school board's policy on health and wellness, and so that position is supposed to support organizing the district's activities around making sure that our healthy foods, our healthy exercise, the mental health issues, all of those things are coordinated in a way that we can address the specifics of the policy.
Given that we have strengthened our wellness and suicide prevention policy among the host of other health-related things, I'm recommending that we do add that to the budget.
Is there a guesstimated cost for that?
89,000, including benefits.
How much?
89,000.
Okay. Thoughts?
I would, if I may, I would support it. I think that having someone take the lead on organizing the wellness, especially when it comes to the suicide policy and mental health, would probably be beneficial. I don't know if we already have that capacity within the division. I don't mind putting it into the budget at this point in time as our first ask for city council. I'm fine with it being in the budget.
So is the recommendation then that we would So we already know that we're asking
Right,
$6 million just to balance what we currently have. You know, whether or not that gets funded or not, we'll see through that process. So is the request then to add the health and wellness coordinator cost on top of the 6 million, or is there a recommended offset to try to stay at the 6 million?
I don't have a recommended offset, so it is to add to the 6 million.
Ask clarity around the 6 million. I thought the 3 million was the one time from last year, and then there was a 4 million ask on top of that, which equals 7 million.
No, we're requesting that the 3 million one time become permanent,
Correct.
and we're asking for an additional 3.
An additional 3.
Right, it looks like the 4 overall increase, but
4 in the column.
The total funding, state, federal, city, and local, is the total budget
Okay, so we're only asking 3 from the local,
from the city, yes,
and then 1 million is coming
coming
from
from the
additional.
state.
Gotcha, okay. I'd recommend that if we do forward with that, we find an offset to it.
also want to share as it relates to the health and wellness piece. We had to your question, you know, was this something that we had the capacity for prior to moving our benefits and support piece? We at least had it for the adults as part of a position that went to the city with the benefits piece. And I apologize, and, you know, and that went as part of the consortium and everything. So are you saying that that position would be in addition to, or are we looking to offset from
So we-
something else in the budget?
We haven't even got to that.
Oh,
point
okay,
yet,
I heard
'cause-
Ms. Doyle asking that question, so.
Well, so my question originally was, is it in addition to, and the response was, let's consider as an addition to. Ms. Doyle was saying, let's look at an offset. What I'm going to suggest we do is, let's finish and see if there's anything else, and then we can come back and talk about, with your guidance, Dr. Boone, if we did offsets, what might that look like? And if we decided to add on, what might that look like after we finish hearing anything else that's being recommended?
The health and wellness, Dr. Boone, when we had one for the faculty, was that correct? Is that?
That was related to benefits, that's what I said, so we had
Okay.
a portion of what's in the policy as part of that, but that's my understanding. That
Because that's what I
position
remember.
was gone when I got here, yep.
So at least have that as a holder for right now.
Okay. All right, and then and Dr. Boone, you and I, we've talked about this, but because we talked about it last week, I just want to make sure everyone is also aware. We talked about, and it seemed to be that we agreed that, or we desired a special ed audit and a gifted review. And through our conversation, even last week, we had openly, you know, we have the federal monitoring going on, and Dr. Boone, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but these 2 items can be done with existing resources, so.
That's correct.
Right, okay, so that, there's that, and that was,
Before you leave, before we leave the audit conversation, Dr. Boone, can you also just remind the board with the relationship we have with the Council of Great City Schools, or any other relationships that we have, any other reviews that are underway right now?
As I reminded the board last week, we have invited the Council of Great City Schools in to help us do a review of our finance and operations support. So last week, week before last, they brought in a team, professionals from across the country in transportation. And so transportation has been completed. We have a team on site this week doing the finance review for us. And next week, we'll have a team on site to help us look at facilities. So, you know, as I've often said publicly and to the board, is that the instructional improvements are just one portion of what we had to do. Obviously, we got to improve our outcomes and our student achievement, which we have taken a very giant leap in that, though not always recognized as the leap it is. But But it's also important that our finance and operations are aligned in a way for even greater effectiveness and efficiency. I am a firm believer in that before we ask for other money, we need to make sure we've addressed our own needs and made some improvements in what were the structural imbalances within the budget. And so I think we've made significant progress on that. And so that's why we've asked them to come in to help us look at making sure we have the right structures, that we're using current best practices, and not just doing things because they've always been done that way. And so that relationship with the Council of Great City Schools exists. Then we also have very strong relationships with higher education and various other entities that will come in and support. They are not free, but again, we don't have to break the bank on them coming in to do the various reviews.
So what do they do, audit each department, or how do they, in terms of the financial piece?
They're doing an overall look at, right, the organizational structure, how we operate, our practices, our principles, our lowercase policies. And so then they will come back to us with a set of recommendations. Once all three of the reviews are completed and we have the final reports, we'll be presenting that information to the board.
Now, do this, doesn't the state do something with special ed in terms of
That was the
compliance?
federal program monitoring that I mentioned last week. That's underway. That's also underway for Title I, Title III, and Perkins, the CTE, Career Tech Ed funding.
All right. Anyone else on this initial round? Joel?
Dr. Boone and Ms. Ingram, can you still just confirm, do you believe we have enough in the budget to support standing up the CTE high school with its programming as delineated in the 4 academies?
We think with because, again, as I was saying last week, we're not starting from zero.
Right.
We certainly have the core infrastructure around classes, the changing of classes and bringing on additional classes and new classes. We're able to accommodate where we are. But once the school gets into its second full year of operation, you will can anticipate additional resource needs being identified there. But again, we have staffing at Norfolk Technical Center that will be part of the staffing there. And we'll have staffing at Booker T that's part of the core work. But though the courses that people are teaching now may not be the same courses because we realigned those pathways. But going forward, both the facilities need and the programmatic needs, the infrastructure in terms of the equipment, the technology that's needed for the 4 pathways and the arts will have significant budgetary implications.
Follow up.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well,
Ms. Wagner?
in terms of upgrading and equipment and everything, I guess I didn't see that as part of, I thought that was the additional piece that wasn't in the budget that we were saying we would consider.
$90 million
Yeah,
new
part
school.
ongoing phasing.
So but who is paying for the $90 million new school? That's
Sign up.
This is the operating budget discussion.
That's why.
It's supposed to, the vision of this, as I inherited it coming back to the district, is that it's supposed to be a public-private partnership in that, so.
So there's the commitment from the schools, there's the support and commitment from the city, and then there's also the support and commitment from Greater Norfolk Corporation, as well as a variety of members of the private sector
So
who
is that a monetary commitment, or?
a
Yes.
combination of both. There's cash, there's intellectual capacity and capital, there's training. So the whole model is really intended to work with the employers to say that if these are the types of skill sets that we want graduates to have, then if we're in the health area and Centera's at the table and helping to guide that discussion, if we're dealing with, it spans the gamut, but, in the ship repair, it can be everything from the IT component to welding or whatever it is that we determine are the appropriate curriculum and programming partnerships. So, you know, right now with the Business IT Academy work that they've been doing, if you look at some of the businesses and corporations that are already working with that, there's everyone from ADP, I know is there, and Centera might be in that discussion, and higher ed. So it's all being driven around how do we match the needs of the employer community, both the current needs and the future needs, to the entire effort. And then what we've added, at least what we've asked the administration to look at in terms of the Booker T component, is because we had the existing specialty there around the arts, we've added that additional fifth area, if you will, where there's expertise and a center of excellence being built in that area on top of, or in addition to, the 4 academies that we had designed in the CT.
And that takes us back to the directive that the board gave administration in December to look at STEAM. So the CTE brings in the STEM portion, the arts maintains the STEAM, and that's why we thought we could accomplish that. And in this budget, we have included positions to address the needs within the arts program.
So is there a document that shows who does what
Yeah,
benchmarks?
We've done multiple presentations to the board, to the council, to the Greater Norfolk Corporation and others as it relates to the CTE schools. There are a number of them on board docs.
With the numbers and everything, and what timetables, benchmarks, who's giving what, whatever?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I just hadn't seen that.
Yeah, and
Okay.
some of it is, you know, I was sharing with some members of the public after the last couple of meetings. I mean, some of it is a work in progress. I mean, there's, it's almost like where we have members of the community that are working with our educational planning. So it's not cookie cutter, and it hasn't all been baked. So part of what we've talked about and we're going to have in April and May moving forward is, you know, ongoing updates from cooperative strategies and the committee. We'll have ongoing updates and discussion with the Greater Norfolk Corporation and others around the governance model. So it's ongoing, but we have been putting in place over the last couple of years work that students are receiving now, as well as items that are being phased in.
I remind, at the mini retreat, Ms. Goshen also presented information on the CTE programming.
I mean, I remember, I heard that. I guess I'm just trying to put all the pieces in places along with the numbers and times and upgrade of what's there in terms of the STEAM, you know.
So I think what could maybe help, Ms. Wagner, I think you're thinking about the school as it currently exists and what may or may not be in place. Booker T has some CTE programming there, as all of our high schools do. And so we've done work at Booker T. I realize that there was commentary made that we had not updated the auditorium, and we have. Auditorium has new seats. We also purchased new curtains for the stage. All of those things have been in an effort to address this, but when we've talked about, I'll go back to the presentation that Mr. Coleman did a few meetings ago, when he addressed the technology aspect and the work that had come in, Danielle Roby and others had helped us look at what would be the technology that folks are also interested in the arts program. And so all of that is rolled into how we begin to launch this work. But again, while we have some deficits, some true deficits in the arts program, we're not starting at zero.
Okay, and one correction, I think what they were saying in terms of the auditorium, what they were talking about, the lights had not ever worked, and the lighting, and I think the chairs, they wanted, the numbers were not on the chairs, if they were going to do tickets or whatever. I think there were just some specific things in terms of that. That's just clarification.
Plugging away. Dr. Gabriel, I think I was coming to you.
Oh, for me, well, we talked about the guidance counselors. One thing that I would like to see within our, I guess the best place for it would be in the equity report, and it doesn't have, there's nothing in the budget now that I would ask for at this time, but I would like to see what our distribution is of our art and music teachers within the division and where they're shared. And this will not have an impact on the budget right now, but I would just like to see these numbers. As I was looking for the guidance numbers, I noted that when I was reviewing the equity report. I would like to get the board's sense of where we are with the GPS on the buses, because we've received emails, we've had folks reach out to us. There's comment last year about it. It was in the budget last year. You know, what we send over to council and then what council is able to provide to us, and then what we do with what we're provided is something that we have to work through. But I would just like to get your sense as to where you are on putting this in the budget again this year and just seeing where it goes.
From the board's perspective? you mean?
Yes.
Do I have any thoughts or comments on that?
Personally, I support GPS on buses, and if we want to put it in the budget and see if it's funded, then great, and we reprioritize based on what the city affords us back, we can certainly do so. So it never hurts to ask at the start, and whatever comes back across the street, we'll just determine what we prioritize. Now, do know it's a carrying cost, right? So it's not just a one-time
It's
sunk.
right, exactly,
So it's something we would need to consider ongoing.
annual.
$120,000 annual.
Right, so everybody just needs to be mindful of that, and if we can find an offset, I'm about offsets or what we can reduce to afford new. But I think to put it in the budget, I think is a good idea, and then determine if we can fund it with a new or with offsets.
Other comments on that? No.
I agree with Mrs. Doyle as well, and, you know, the long term could be that there are savings or enhance our operating costs around that too. So I agree with upfront, you know, asking for it, and if there are offsets, as we look at other offsets in the budget, you know, I'm fine with putting it in there for the ask right now, but of course, you know, we may have to revisit that.
I would,
Definitely a national trend, and we're looking at safety always, so I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I'll have a, you know, I was in a Facebook conversation this week, and I can remember, I don't know if it was when I first got on the board, and at one of the VSBA annual conventions, having a conversation with one of the vendors. You know, I support the technology. The piece that, so it's a couple of things, just to be frank about it, that concern me about the conversation around it. You know, last year when we looked at the GPS in the budget and it was recommended, we also had conversations around students that didn't have access to a bus at all. And, you know, we've talked a lot about equity and how we serve the needs for all children. So I support the idea that children don't have to stand in the rain or in bad weather when they're waiting on the bus, or that parents know that where their child is when they're trying to come home or waiting on the bus and so forth. But, you know, early in the morning, I also walk around the city. And Ms. Wagner pointed this out last year. And I see a lot of students who are walking down Bramilton Avenue, crossing Bramilton Avenue, crossing Tidewater Drive, crossing railroad tracks, walking down railroad tracks, in the snow, in the rain.
Pass.
What's that?
On, under the.
Underpass, trying to get to school as well. And so in one sense, I think it is helpful for parents that have children on buses. But I also have a concern about the children that are walking. I can remember years ago when Dr. Simpson was superintendent, and there were children who were walking across the railroad tracks on whatever it is, 20-something Street, 22nd Street, where going down through Park Place and Lambert's Point. And at one time, when the school division had a lot more money, then they were able to provide buses for children because the conversation was if you had to cross a dangerous intersection like a railroad track, we would provide resources. We still have children today that are walking across these railroad tracks. So, we can put it in there. I feel like we are not considering all children, but we have to make those tough decisions all the time. The other thing that concerns me about it is I don't want to go down the slippery slope of categorical funding, where certain ideas come up. If there's enough perceived or real concern about a particular topic, then we as a school board start putting these different items in there for this process of, we'll stick it in there, see if the city fully funds the budget. It doesn't get fully funded. We come back and make decisions around what we have, and then we get beat up because we didn't choose a particular item, and then the conversation becomes, well, the school board doesn't care about my issue, so therefore I'm going to stick into the city's budget or try to stick into the school board's budget, particular areas where I have interest. And we were just talking a moment ago about the Council of Great City Schools coming in and doing assessments. Well, I know when Reverend Haywood and Dr. Gabriel and I first got on the board, one of the reports that we got was from the Council of Great City Schools dealing with middle schools. And part of what they, my words, admonished the school board about was, one, giving too much focus to the budget versus academics, and another was allowing the division to become a system of schools versus a school system. And I just worry that if we end up going down this path, we have to be careful that not only do we continue to be a system of schools versus a school system, but then we become a system of schools with individual projects that are all excellent things to have, but we haven't quite figured out how to integrate it all with the whole. The last thing I'm going to say on it, Dr. Boone just mentioned that the council is coming in and looking at transportation operations. So at some point in time, hearing whatever's going to come back from that assessment seems to me would help, perhaps, I don't know all that they're going to be looking at, but may find some areas of adjustment. I said it was going to be my last, but I just thought of something else. And the other thing that we worked on just last month, or maybe it was earlier this month, was the fact that we have, was it 42 bus driver vacancies? Was that the number? Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I would suspect that our good efforts at providing more choice for parents, our standing up of new programs in schools, on top of having 42 bus vacancies, has stressed the transportation system. And I don't think the stress on the transportation system is going to go away, but somehow I think we need to find some balance between meeting the things that we've identified as a board that the community has asked for, and the recognition that sometimes they're going to come with a little growing pain. And so that's my soliloquy on that. Ms. Doyle?
Share a few things. I think that GPS is, in my mind, is kind of like a normal course of doing business. It's almost like having a telephone on your desk or a copier in your office. It's doing business. And we haven't done that just for funding reasons for years, and many others around us have. And so I view it as just a normal course of business. Secondly, this year we are funding, and we are focused very much on our transportation system through the study and through the additional resources and funding we're going to supply in salary for the bus drivers, which I think is great. So I just view it as an enhancement to the whole transportation area, not just with people, but with technology.
So we've got it down, and we're going to come back and look at additions or offsets, so we'll have a conversation around what the offset might look like and what the addition might look like.
And I will have to piggyback what you said in terms of the conversation in the community about the bus that was asked for last year, because that's still in the community. And you're right in terms of the GPS. I agree with you on that piece. It's just a good business to have.
This conversation has come up several times, and I think, to your point, in looking at the whole picture with what the Council of Great City Schools is doing when they're looking at operations, probably warrants a conversation after we get through this budget cycle, so that we make sure that we are looking at everything in its entirety with regards to, you know, when the student walks out of their door, comes to the building, and then goes back. I don't have a problem with that, and if there are things that we can partner with the city to make sure intersections and crossings are safe and whatnot, let's do it. But I think we can have that conversation, but I still think we can at least put it in the budget as an ask this go around and continue to develop the thought process around making sure that we're looking at all of the transportation concerns and needs for the kids.
State of the world requires it.
I mean, I used to think, like, what did I used to do without the cell phone? My life was much better, but, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. We used to have resilient children. Anything else related to that topic, or Dr. Gabriel, anything else there?
No, I think that was it. And then with what Dr. Boone had provided with the tweaking within the budget, I'm very comfortable with that.
Reverend Haywood, anything?
GPS is not a priority for me. It wasn't last year for the board or year before that. I agree with Mrs. Doyle and the idea of prioritizing this when the budget comes back, offsets, but it's not a priority. And I'm not really sure why it's become a priority this year as opposed to last year when we looked at it in the year before.
Anything else outside of that you'd like for us to consider? So I just had one additional thing. First of all, I just want to reiterate, almost similar to what I did last year. I think there are significant pieces in the proposal as it currently exists that are advancing the work that we've been doing year-round and over the last few years. I think the next phasing of the pay and comp is significant, and the work that we've asked around alternative education, I think, is also significant. And the commitment to bus drivers and adding attendance for students with disabilities on those buses, I also think is significant. The one area I brought up last week that I think goes to the core of the work, or part of the core of the work of the board in terms of trying to make decisions based upon data, deals with additional capacity with our research department, which for me, as we continue to deal with the educational work, I feel has highlighted. That's not to suggest that the capacity that we have is not good. I just think we need more so that in some instances we can get some things turned around and be able to address on the dime without further stressing an understaffed department as it is. So I think we need more capacity. We're in our technology and research area. I don't want to drill down in terms of saying it needs to be in GIS or whatever particular area, but I think we need it. A potential offset, however, for it is, I think we have capacity within our students that if we were able to support, whether it's in school or out of school, if you took Arturo and Torian and a few of their peers and, you know, let them go to work on some projects, I believe that they would be able to support
Part of the IT
some of our Yeah, they probably solved the bus problem for us.
Yeah.
But I think we have some highly talented students that are technology savvy, and if we gave them projects that we know we needed from, whether it's the board work, the governance team work, the education planning work, almost have them as a internship with some of our consultants as we build that into our RFPs. I think that's a way that we can get some added capacity, have our students get hands-on experience as we talk about CT and so forth, and where it doesn't involve, private student data, be able to support some of the work. Now, having been involved with that, I'm not naive to the fact that when you have students, it takes adults to provide support to that. But I would ask that we ask Dr. Boone and the administration to look at that with some intentionality and see if there is some way to get that added support through working with students without taxing the existing system. But I think we just need it. You may recall when we were going through the educational planning piece, we had a email come through from a citizen who asked for some data sets that dealt with the whole GIS because we were dealing with mapping. That person's capacity and capability as an individual is something I just think we need, and something I think our students would also excel. So I would ask that the board consider pushing forward with that. Not sure it specifically has to be tied to this budget, but I do think it's something we have to tie to our capacity. All right.
Yeah.
Ms. Basine?
I want to second that. I think this is the first year that I haven't specifically asked about that too. And not only our students, our high school students, but I know in the past, we've also partnered with our higher ed to help support in that capacity. And if that, for whatever reason, has either been terminated or hasn't been utilized to the best, I would encourage us to re-engage in those partnerships also.
Okay, so let's go back and revisit some things, and why don't we start from the most recent? So the GPSs on the buses, we've determined that's at least 120,000, 120. So if we were going to, or Dr. Boone, if you're looking to offset that, what would be something you think that you all would consider in terms of putting that in but offsetting it?
This particular budget is what I've described as a no-growth budget. We have worked hard to maintain what we have, to be able to address the pay and comp piece. The only growth that we had in the budget deals with the mixed income pre-K classes. Due to enrollment and the state re-examining how it funds pre-K, we're scheduled to lose 6 more classes. And so our budget proposal includes establishing 3 mixed income classes to meet the board's equity goals and greater diversity in our pre-K classrooms. If not there, if not in the pay and comp, then we will have to go into other programmatic issues.
I gather that would be the same answer to all of these?
Roughly, this is for the health and wellness coordinator, because I was keeping a separate parking lot. Health and wellness coordinator and GPSs on the bus is a little over 200,000.
So that would be what you would recommend, or not
I'm
necessarily recommend, but want the
thank you.
board to understand.
Board to understand, yeah. Because everything else, like I said, will get into the impact of phase 2 of the pay and comp study. It would also then begin to into some of our other programs and supports and services and things we have to do. And I will remind the board, there's still the issue of what's going on in Washington.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
we're all those of us in public education and holding with bated breath whether or not we'll get a budget approved by Friday. If not,
Views on that. Congress appears to have reached a 1.3 trillion spending deal ahead of midnight Friday deadline.
devil's in the detail.
I know, I'm just saying, just saying what the
Because,
news
you know,
just
for us, we have some grants that could be impacted.
No, I know,
And, you know,
federal, this is federal.
right, that's the federal, yeah.
Yeah.
The state one just disappointed me a little while ago, so.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Ms. Basine?
So, you know, when we were having the GPS conversation and, Mr. Jordan mentioned the Council of Great City Schools report, where I know transportation was obviously one of the departments that studies. Do you anticipate any savings there that could then offset, or any efficiencies that have been identified that we would address that may offset the cost of, you know, potentially either both of those items or?
I don't know yet.
Know
They
yet.
haven't given us the final report, but in the preliminary report, it was more around training
Okay,
and support there. I mean, you know, one of our expenses in transportation deals usually with fuel cost. And, you know, we described our aging bus fleet. Newer buses mean more efficient buses, less fuel consumption, less maintenance, so.
Well, perhaps what we do as it relates to the 200,000 is recommend moving forward, knowing that you have to then investigate what potentially you would have as an offset. Because I don't think we should put the division on the spot right now and say, what are you going to take off the table to make the two until you
Well, I
have
don't
time to.
disagree. I just want to make sure that the administration has an opportunity to share with the board what they may consider. And so if you know, we earlier said we were going to look at offsets. So I wanted her to have an opportunity to describe the offsets. If it's the will of the board not to deal with the offsets and just make it a 6.2 or $6,200,000 request, then, you know, if that's the will of the board, then, you know, we can go that route. So,
yeah, because, you know, I'm not willing to compromise the pay and comp, the good work that we're doing to, you know, put our teachers on a competitive pay scale. And I do think the mixed income pre-K is something that we've philosophically feel is fundamental. So, yeah, for me, it's an add to the 6 million, not a takeaway of the items that were just described.
again, we know at this point, this is, whatever it is that we come up with is going to be our proposed ask. And this is not we're not sending over a cafeteria budget. We're sending over a request to fund our budget, because I just want to, I'll say it, because I've heard Dr. Boone say it to us so many times. All the things that we talked about, the pay and comp, the support for social emotional well-being, the support for in-school suspension, support and safety, the support for bus drivers, all of that is contingent upon the $6 million to $6,200,000 ask being met. If it's not met, then we're going to come back in May, maybe with a couple of weeks in that period of time, trying to adjust for the June period to make some decisions on what is going to get done. So I just want to make sure that we are constantly communicating that this is an ask, and in the absence of getting that budget fully funded, then many of these things, the CT school, all of it, may be delayed or at risk.
At risk, right, right.
So what I'm hearing from the board is then we would like to, at this point, add another $200,000 to the base budget that would support health and wellness and GPSs on buses. correct? All right, anything else anyone would like to discuss at this point related to the budget?
I just have one clarification.
Okay.
So last week, Mr. Jordan and we had talked about this, about the additional funds for outside legal counsel, and that is already in the operating budget,
Yes.
right? Correct, okay.
Yeah,
All right,
Yes, that was in the additional
clarify,
information I
okay.
sent.
Right.
It had actually been, there's some in the clerk's budget and the rest is in the superintendent's budget.
Okay.
Yeah, when I had originally looked at it, when we talked about it some time ago, I thought we had put it in the school board's budget.
Yeah, I did too, that's why.
But I
yeah.
think the amount that's in the school board budget, some of that deals with some of the ongoing legal things we deal with versus
Okay.
really talking about trying to make sure that anytime the superintendent of the board felt that we needed additional counsel or were concerned about any perceived conflicts, that we would have some resources that we could access if we needed to.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Anything else right now? So before we close out the work session, then maybe just a couple of things for the board as a whole. So just as a reminder, we have a governance training set up for April the 20th. I believe that's right. For one day. Everybody, I know Dr. Gabriel has a conflict. Everybody else is good with that. No, we have that training. It's one day on a Friday in Charlottesville. Dr. Boone, anything just overall administrative wise, non-budget related that we can touch on while we have the moment here?
Looking around at the team, because my head has been deep into the numbers.
Yeah.
No, I think all is well. You know, we'll be soon celebrating our Lake Taylor High School basketball team, boys basketball team, who won the state Region 4 championship. And Lake Taylor's girls were the state runner-ups.
Right.
So represented Norfolk Public Schools very well throughout the season and into the tournament. Of course, we're monitoring the weather, but it's going to be much of nothing. So that's a good thing. No, so I think, have I missed it? I'm looking at the team. Have I missed anything? Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and adjourn, and we'll have some time to relax. I think Attorney Cloud may be over by 3:30. So if you want to get an early start on the closed session, we can try to do that, so don't go too far. But for now, we'll consider the meeting adjourned.